So far, we've learned a lot about how to use the pivotal politics model to figure out whether a particular bill will make it through both houses and be signed by the president into law. In this module, we're going to look at two different things. First, the gridlock interval, and second, author control. Let's start by looking at our combined line from the last module. We've got the policy space again, and here are all of our pivots. We need the median members from each house, the speaker, the Senate filibuster pivots, and the president. We'll skip the veto pivots for now. Notice that we've got two different filibuster pivots. The one on the left is Senator number 41, and the one on the right is Senator number 60. The first thing we need to figure out is when number 41 is pivotal and when number 60 is pivotal. If the proposal is trying to make the law more conservative, then the bill needs to get the 60 most conservative senators on board. That means that if the proposal is to the right of the status quo, the left filibuster pivot is the one that matters. If the proposal is to the left of the status quo, we need to get the leftmost 60 senators, so Senator number 60, the right filibuster pivot, is the one that matters. So let's start with an example where the status quo is here and the proposed bill is here. Since the bill would move the law in a conservative direction, the left filibuster pivot is the one we need to worry about, so we'll gray out the other one. After the last module, it should be incredibly obvious to you that this bill will not pass. Let's review why. Here's the cut point halfway between the status quo and the bill. Politicians on the P side of the cut line will vote for the bill. Here's the group of pivots that support the bill, but notice that the filibuster pivot isn't in that set. And because not all the pivots are on the P side of the cut point, the bill won't pass. Now, you might think that the bill was just too conservative. Maybe if we moderate the bill a little bit, that would do the trick. Well, let's try that out. Let's shift the proposed bill back closer to the status quo. The cut point shifts back also when the proposed bill comes back, but it's still not enough to get the filibuster pivot on the right side of the cut line. In fact, bring the proposal all the way back toward the status quo, as close as you'd like it, and it still won't be enough to get it through the Senate. Well, maybe the problem is that we need a progressive change to the status quo. Maybe if we proposed a leftist proposal, it would fare better. Well, let's find out. First, we move the proposal over to the left, and we draw the cut point right between the P and the Q as always. But since we're trying to make the law more progressive, we need to get the 60 most progressive senators. So that means that the filibuster pivot is now Senator number 60, not Senator 41. So here's the new filibuster pivot for a bill moving the law to the left. Supporters of the proposal are now on the left side of the cut point, since the proposal is to the left of the status quo. As you can see, several of the pivots don't like this bill. There's no chance this bill gets through and becomes a law now. Notice that any proposal to move the law to the right fails, as does any proposal that moves the law to the left. It's stuck. Why? Whenever the status quo point is stuck in between two different pivots, there's no way to move it. If you try to move the law to the right, the pivot on the left doesn't like it. And if you propose a more progressive change, the pivot on the right prefers the more conservative status quo. So we call this region between the outer pivots the gridlock interval. Any status quo in the gridlock interval will be safe from any proposed change. That's the gridlock interval. Now, if we want to take a look at author control, let's go back to our line and assume that the status quo proposal is out here, outside of the gridlock interval, so that all of the pivots think that the law is currently too progressive. Since the status quo is outside the gridlock interval, there's a chance to change the law. The policy-making window is open. So now the question is, what proposal can pass? If you think back on everything we've learned so far, you should be able to figure this out pretty easily. Remember, we need all of the pivotal players to vote for the proposal. The way we get all of the pivotal players to vote in favor of the bill is to keep them all on the proposal side of the cut point. So how can we do that here? The first thing to do is to figure out which of these players is really pivotal. Who's the first pivot who will be the most demanding? Well, let's not play around. It's the pivot closest to the status quo. And why is that? Well, let's look at the House median. What bills would the House median support over the current status quo? Well, clearly anything between the current status quo and the median's ideal point is better for her. Would she support a bill more conservative than she is? Well, sure, to a point. She'd just rather have something a little bit to her right than way off to the left. Remember, what the pivots care about is how far away the bill and status quo points are. They don't care at all about direction. How far to the right could a proposal go before the House median would vote against it? Well, we've answered a question like this before. Remember, we flipped the status quo over the median's ideal point. This point here that we got from doing the flip is the same distance from the House median as the status quo point is. So any proposal between the status quo and this point out here, the House median will vote for. Well, let's compare that to the filibuster pivot, which is the pivotal player closest to the status quo. To find the set of bills the filibuster pivot would support, we do the same flip thing. We flip over the filibuster pivot and land here. And notice that this range of policies is much smaller than the set the House median would approve. The filibuster pivot in this instance is the binding pivot. It's the one that really matters. And one thing you should convince yourself of is that any policy that the binding pivot approves will be approved by all of the other pivots. And with that in mind, we can say that this set of policies, the one approved by the filibuster pivot, the binding pivot, is the acceptable policy window. Any bill in this window will be approved. So now we come to the idea of author control. Suppose the president decides that the White House will take the lead and draft this legislation. What legislation will the president propose? What happens if the president proposes the White House's ideal policy? Will that pass? Well, no. The filibuster pivot prefers the status quo to the president's ideal policy. So if the White House says, "Give me what I want or else," the filibuster pivot will take the else option and the president gets absolutely nothing. That said, this president wants to get the most conservative policy possible. So what policy is that? The key to answer this is to recognize what is possible. The set of possible policies is that line segment we just found centered at the binding pivot. So the president will write a bill right at the edge of that region. If the president proposes a bill here, the filibuster pivot and all of the other pivots will support it, and it'll pass. If the president offers a more conservative bill, it won't. If the president offers a slightly more progressive bill, sure, it'll pass, but the president wouldn't like it as much as the other one that he could write and he could pass. Well, suppose a centrist congressman with an ideal point about here proposes the bill. Where will the author put that bill? Well, remember, any bill in this region will pass, so the author can pick any of these points. And since the author's ideal bill is in the set, he'll propose a bill at his ideal point, and it will pass. What this shows is that in pivotal politics, where we assume a take-it-or-leave-it structure, the proposer has so much power. Sometimes they can even get exactly what they want without needing to compromise if their ideal point is inside the accepted policy window. Okay, that's all for this module. By now you should be able to work the full pivotal politics model. There's only one thing left for you to learn before you can start analyzing any policy you want. We still have to learn how to locate the policies and the people on the line in the first place. To this point, I've always put the points on the line for you. In the next module, I'll show you how you can do it yourself.